Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and I have Dr. Jeff Meyers from Summit Ministries on the podcast today to talk about gender confusion and how to help our kids be confident in who God made them to be. I know you're going to love this conversation. And that segues perfectly into the fact that Summit Ministries is one of our podcast sponsors because they know I have loved sending my older kids there to learn about how to answer and address those big questions, like how do we talk about gender in a world that's trying to make it a confusing topic when God makes it clear? If this is something you feel like your students ages 13 to 25 would benefit from in a summer program, you can go to summit.org/mama. That's summit.org/MAMA and use the code MAMA26 for $250 more off of your early bird pricing. I also want to remind you about our podcast sponsor, the Kingsbridge Elderberries. I actually have their products here in my hands today. This giant jug of elderberry syrup is a 32-ounce whopper that will last your family through cold and flu season. The ingredients are Indiana-grown American black elderberries, local raw honey, organic ginger, cinnamon, and clove. It's delicious. My 5-year-olds literally asked me for this today. It is wonderful for your immune system. They handpicked their berries for freshness, and then they cold pressed them to keep the antioxidants and nutrients absolutely at their peak. They also have elderberry jelly, which is delicious as well. This is wonderful on crepes or toast. And if any of their products are something that your family would enjoy or benefit from, and I promise you they are, you can use the code MAMA10 for 10% off of your order at tkrfarm.com. And last but not least, we have Voteberg Music Academy. VMA is a wonderful way to stay out of the cold and the snow this season and instead stay inside this season learning lessons in guitar, mandolin, fiddle, ukulele, and piano. You can share lessons between siblings, which is an incredibly affordable way to learn. You can also join in their annual Jingle Jam Challenge, where you can join with thousands of other families who also use VMA and see what other families are creating to celebrate this Christmas season. You can use my code MSForMama20 to get 20% off each month that you're enrolled and give the gift of music to your family for as little as $30 a month. That's MSForMama20 at VotebergMusicAcademy.com. Hi, guys. I have the distinct pleasure of having Dr. Jeff Meyers from Summit Ministries here on the podcast today. And you guys have heard me talk about Summit Ministries. They're a sponsor for this podcast. My kids have gone there and gleaned so much wisdom and experience. We absolutely love them. And I'm so excited to have Jeff here today to talk about a topic that is really starting to define this age, this generation. And that is the idea of raising gender confident kids. In fact, that is the name of your new book with Kathy Cook. Jeff, welcome on the show and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Abby. It's great to be with you. Yeah, Dr. Kathy and I were we each were thinking independently, somebody needs to address this. How do you help parents raise their children to be confident in the way God made them? And we just had a conversation. I said, are you going to write this book? Because if you are, we want to promote it. She said, well, I thought you were going to write it. Well, okay, let's write it together. And it was a wonderful partnership. I'm sorry that Kathy can't be here at this. We're kind of tag teaming on a lot of different things right now. But transgenderism and gender confidence seem to be one of the biggest issues that Gen Z faces. And now it's starting to taper off maybe a little bit, but the messaging and the culture is against everything the Bible teaches and against everything we want our kids to really believe.
100%. Backing up, rewinding, let's say 20 years, 30 years. Was this something that you anticipated coming down the pipe as strongly as it has in the last 5 years or so?
Well, Abby, I have to be honest. I was at that time, I was in graduate school, the University of Denver. And one of the papers we were assigned to read and discuss was called Doing Gender. And it suggested that gender was a performance, not a state of being. And I remember at the time thinking, if this idea ever catches on, then no boy will ever be able to distinguish between a boy and a girl. No girl will ever be able to distinguish between a boy and a girl. And if you can get a little child to look at a boy and girl and say, I can't tell the difference, then you can get them to believe anything.
Oh, man.
I think this is not just the end of gender. This is the end of reason.
100%. I think that is the key here, is that we are asking little children, teenagers, adults to accept a fantasy which flies directly in the face of the clearly stated parameters of gender and sex, womanhood, manhood that's laid out in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. So you saw that there was something that was kind of percolating that was
I
potentially
saw it coming down the pike, and probably 7 or 8 years ago, we started to see more students coming asking questions like, you know, is it possible to be a boy in a girl's body, and things like that. It seems like the students at Summit Ministries, they're not behind the culture; they seem to be ahead of it. And we realized at that time, oh, this is getting ready to be a big deal. And sure enough, it exploded into the public consciousness.
Yeah, what do you think were the impetuses for why it became so big so suddenly? I know it's not as actually as sudden as it seems. I know that there was a lot going on underneath the surface for many years. I mean, you're talking about being in graduate school and seeing pieces of this starting to fall into place, but it really has exploded in the last 5, 6, 7 years. Really, really, really coming to the fore in the last, I would say, 4. And then you're saying tapering off, which I want to talk to you about. But what do you think kind of were the big pushes that put it in the forefront?
Well, it's a perfect storm in so many ways. And Kathy and I in our book have a chapter on where this actually came from. So part of it came from social media. Social media allows everybody to tell their story and to come across credibly. And I think we've somehow, through the way we've used social media in this culture, come to trust it more than we trust the key people in our lives. That the stories we hear online somehow are more valid because they're out there somewhere, and lots of other people have watched them and listened to them, whereas nobody listens to my mom.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So how do you establish a comparison for the validity of these stories? So social media is a big part of it. And it turns out Lisa Littman did this study back in 2018, I think, and she discovered that of the young women who had what she called rapid onset gender dysphoria, 2/3 of them were daily overwhelmingly immersed in social media. So it was a social media contagion in that way.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That was one. Another one is the education system. So we all know teachers, and we know they don't get the best salaries, but tons and tons more money every year goes into the education system. Where is this money going?
Right.
And turns out, while the number of teachers has not really increased and their salaries have not increased, there has been a doubling in the budget for administrators in virtually every school district in the United States of America. Who are these new administrators and what are they doing? Well, many of them are there to enforce an ideological conformity to a worldview that runs counter to what most Americans believe. Now, it's not just socialism, although that could be part of it, but it's this idea that we need to tear down anything that we think stands in the way of children feeling the very best about themselves. And so if we see a child who's anxious or depressed, it can't be that there's something inside of them that we need to adjust or help them with, which would be more of a biblical worldview. It has to be some force outside of them. And we think the force outside of them is this gender conformity, that everybody is male or female. This is hurting kids, and we need to address it. So half the schools in the United States of America, have made gender ideology a part of their curriculum. Now, I will say the teachers are not really all on board with this. 2/3 of teachers, according to one survey that was done by a teachers union, these are not conservatives.
Which is not a conservative movement, no.
2/3 of the teachers said they're really uncomfortable with making gender ideology such a centerpiece of the curriculum. And only 5% said they thought it was helpful to do so with elementary age children. And yet it's happening in half the schools in the country. So that's a big part of it. Third, and this is hard to say, but there is kind of a profit motive in the pharmaceutical world. A child who goes on puberty blockers is going to be essentially a lifelong medical patient. And it's an extraordinary amount of money. The makers of a drug called Lupron, which is primarily used for men who have prostate cancer. It's very helpful. It limits their testosterone production, which allows their bodies to recover from prostate cancer. It's used for women who have endometriosis, which is horribly debilitating disease. So it's a very, very helpful drug. However, somebody discovered they could give this to children. It would delay the onset of puberty. Now, in order to use this, what's called a puberty blocker, for that purpose, could cost families somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 a year.
Oh, my word.
Now, if they don't pay it, the insurance company has to pay it. Well, why would the insurance company pay it? Because the people who formed the standards of care for treating transgender identified people made sure that this is called what's quote unquote medically necessary treatment. And if it's medically necessary, that's the clue to the insurance company. You're required to cover this.
Right.
Then they opened up this entire new field of medicine to do these things to children that are off-label uses of experimental drugs that have essentially sterilized possibly tens of thousands of young people in this country. So there's the medical angle. And there are probably more. I could go on, but that, just you start to see, wow, it was a perfect storm of all of these factors. And then just pure propaganda coming from the LGBTQ plus arena that made this the centerpiece. And it's all super simple. I mean, why did they not target people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s? Why did they target people in their teens and 20s? Because they're the ones who are struggling the most to find a sense of purpose. 75% of young people say they don't have a sense of purpose that gives meaning to their lives. And they're going through changes that can be quite disturbing. Puberty is disorienting to people, literally to every single person who has ever lived. And now young people are told, if you feel discomfort during puberty, it could be because you were born in the wrong body. As soon as you make that statement and make that the centerpiece of the ideology, becomes the lens through which that young person begins to see everything else. And the discomfort turns from a discomfort into, actually, I am wrong. I was born completely wrong.
Right. And I think going way back, and thank you for that thorough overview. I think that's going to be really helpful in clarifying for a lot of parents where some of these influences are coming from, because I guarantee you that you've got some kids coming home from schools, or even parents who are homeschooling their children and seeing this influence, and they're going, where is this seeping in? Because this is not coming from me. I don't believe this. I stand on the word of God. That's what I've always taught my children. But going back to what you said at the very beginning, which is that there is a questioning when you have a child who is being exposed to social media, which I would think immediately should beg the question of every parent. Why is this child on social media, knowing the influence it could have, knowing that it could undermine your God-given influence to train your children up in the teaching and admonition of the Lord, which would include clear direction from Scripture about your gender and your sex and your identity in Christ. But that going back to that idea that, well, I mean, who cares what mom says? When the fact of the matter is that there are studies that show that children considered to be experts, the first person to address a topic, like a really important topic like this. So and you talk about this in the book, you do a really good job of breaking down practical ways to have conversations with your children. What do you think is the importance of being kind of the main touchstone for your kids as parents, to be the first person to talk about gender, identity, personhood, all of these things that are being attacked right now?
Yeah, it's conversation. So keeping the lines of communication open is central. That's why Kathy and I in the book have more than 200 conversation starters.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you actually say this in this very awkward situation.
Yes.
So when do you start doing it? Well, I tended, when my children were younger, I tended to try to follow their interests. What are they looking at? So my gaze is always at what they're gazing at.
Yeah.
So it's simple. If you're in public and you see in the grocery store that there's a bearded male walking down the aisle in high heels and a dress, look at your child. Does your child notice this? They probably do.
Yeah.
And when that question comes up, Mommy, there was a man wearing a dress in the grocery store. That's your cue that this is something that your child is trying to figure out. And in that situation, you just want to sit down with them, depending on, and you know your child, depending on how threatened they feel or uncomfortable they feel, you might want to do it while you're riding around, because then you're looking forward and they're looking forward and you're not having to look at each other. For some children, that's uncomfortable. A lot of children have told us that when they have something hard to talk about with their parents, they don't want to see their face
Yeah,
because
I think that makes sense.
they might be uncomfortable, and children don't want their parents to feel uncomfortable. So your kids are actually protective of you, believe it or not, in that way. So finding a way to say, yeah, did you notice that in the grocery store? What did you think of that? Why do you think a grown man would wear a dress like that? Why would he want to, knowing he's a man, want to be a woman? And then be able to say, there are a lot of people in this world, and this is kind of sad, but they just don't know who they are. They don't have any confidence. Nobody's ever said to them, I love you just the way you are. God made you just the way you are. And they get really, really confused. And some people get so confused that they aren't even sure whether they're a boy or a girl.
Yeah.
And I just, I want you to know we feel sorry for people like that. We never make fun of people like that. But I want you to know that God made you just the way he did on purpose.
Yeah, I think that is the key element there, is that when we go back to the sovereignty of God, God's omnipotence, God's foreknowledge, when he knit you together in your mother's womb, or, if you're an adoptive parent, when he knit that child together in their birth mother's womb and then gave them by intention to you to parent, that there was no mistake made. That is one of the biggest lies. And I think it is the bedrock of the spiritual aspect of what we're dealing with, because I love that you're bringing the science into it. I love that you're bringing the research. I love that you're bringing the kind of the psychological undergirdings, and then even the practical things that are being done to push this as an agenda on our children. But ultimately, Satan is the father of lies. And it is a lie that you were made somehow in error, or that you exist randomly separate from an intention by a loving and divine God who made you just right, just the way you are, even when you're uncomfortable with it. And so when you were saying something a little while back about the idea of the educators or psychologists or thought leaders came at this idea of gender, it immediately came into my brain, why gender? Why not? Why not? Now there's a lot of racial identity politics. Why not economic status? Why not intelligence? Why gender? And I really think it goes back to, if Satan can attack those first 3 chapters of Genesis, where God so clearly showed a design for man, for creation, then for humankind, then specifically for male and female, he created them. In his image, he created them, it says. Then you can create enough confusion, you said it earlier, that you can get them to believe almost anything. So I want to talk about that. Why do you think it's so important that boys and girls recognize that they each have a role to play in God's creation?
Yeah, if I could just go back just a little bit and address, I think Satan, as a liar, will use whatever strategy he thinks will work with you to pull you away from God. So if he can convince you that the rich people are to blame for everything bad that's happened in society, then he'll use that argument with you.
Sure.
If he thinks that you believe that race and you're not part of the majority culture and that can be used to separate you from God, he'll go that route. If he thinks that getting you to be angry that all males are toxic and use, that the patriarchy is this conspiratorial enemy that's warring against my success, he'll use that.
Sure.
So I think the patriarchy became kind of the reason why gender became such a big deal. So what do we want children to understand? I think a couple of things. First of all, that God designed us differently on purpose to harmonize with each other. And second of all, that the difficulties we experience in our lives are going to be used to strengthen our character so that we become better people. And let me start with that first one, the idea of harmony. If you never read past the first page of the Bible, you would know two things about human beings. Number one, that we're made in God's image. And number two, that we're made male and female. The genus of something is its category. It's so if you might have the cat genus, and it would be tigers and lions and house cats, but there are only two kinds of human beings. People of different facial features are not different kinds of human beings. People of different nationalities are not different kinds of human beings. People of different races are not different kinds of human beings, despite what evolution has taught us for the last 120, 30 years, starting with Charles Darwin. The only kinds of human beings there are male and female.
Yeah.
So that is our gender. That's why we use the term gender in the book. And there's a lot of people disagree about that. When I first texted Charlie Kirk, I got this new book coming out, Raising Gender Confident Kids. He said, I want to talk to you on the show about it. He said, but you should have talked to me first. Gender is a fake word. And, LOL, smiley face, whatever. Because Charlie was a good friend, but he understood the battle is really over how we define terms.
Absolutely.
Totally over how we define terms. So boys and girls being different, why is that important? Because God creates differences in order to produce harmony, which brings glory to him. So differences are part of creation. Now, a new spiritualist worldview will say, no, everything is one. It's all the force. It's all one. Everything is one. There's no real difference between good or evil or male or female or anything else. Everything that exists is one thing. God created differences on purpose. He made the sky. He made the land. He made the sea. Or made the earth, made the sea, made the land, made the animals of the sea, made the animals of the air, day, night, all these different differences, because the harmony between the differences creates beauty. It creates an extraordinary sense that somehow these two things working together are better than if they were just one thing to begin with. And God designed males and females that way. One thing we point out in the book, Abby, is there aren't male and female is not just a matter of secondary sex characteristics. This is one of the things the transgender agenda will say, well, if I'm a boy and I dress up like a girl and you can't tell the difference, then, is there really a difference between boy and girl?
Yeah.
There are 6,500 cataloged biological differences between males and females. It's not just an issue of secondary sex characteristics or your Adam's apple, your jawline, or your facial hair. 6,500 differences. These differences between males and females can be seen to harmonize. And I can just give a couple of examples. One we give in the book, it's one of my favorite chapters of the book, is how we see the world. Now, every human being has retinal cells, two kinds of retinal cells, rods and cones. Rods are the kinds of cells that focus on contrast and motion. Cones are the kinds of cells that focus on color and texture. Boys have a preponderance of rods that focus on contrast and motion, not just a few more, 30% more. Girls have 30% more of the kinds of cells that focus on color and texture. Now, if you want to accurately see the world, you have to see it with contrast, motion, color, and texture. In other words, God designed males and females so that they need each other to accurately see the world.
This is why I have to help my husband get dressed on Sundays, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. He's thinking about where are we moving? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? What's the path? Is there an obstacle?
Yeah.
And you're thinking you can't wear plaid shirt and a plaid tie, right? And,
exactly.
So it is, yes. Yeah. And this is not to say that there aren't guys out there who are awesome at color and texture, but it is to say that when males and females do see the world differently, there's got to be a reason for that. And it's so that they can harmonize together to better see the world. Stress is another one. Okay. In your family, you experience stress. Turns out males and females stress response is totally different. Now I will have to, kind of put a little footnote here. All of these studies were done on rats because the only way to do it is to put an animal under stress. then take out its brain and look at it.
Yeah.
And humans don't like to have this done to them. So they did
No.
it with rats. Rats probably don't like it either, but we didn't ask. So the studies were done on rats. They found that male bodies, when they undergo stress, their bodies upregulate dopamine, which is a hormone that moves them into action. Female bodies, when they experience stress, their bodies upregulate norepinephrine, which causes them to be more thoughtful and observant in that moment. Now, either one of those could be bad. If you're just moving into action rashly, you can make the problem a whole lot worse. If you're only thinking about it, ruminating on it, it doesn't ever get any better. God literally designed males and females so that we need each other to appropriately respond to stressful situations. And I could go on and on about this, but I think it's really important to help our children understand that God made you to be a girl or a boy, not because you like soccer or because you like climbing trees or because you like dolls or you like whatever design. Those are all stereotypes. God made you the way he did so that you would harmonize well with other people. Now, I sometimes use the example of a roof. If you see a roof that has two pitches, you know that if you removed one of them, the other one would collapse. And they're very heavy. You take the wood, all the insulation, the nails, the shingles, all that stuff, and it's super heavy. But when they lean on each other, it creates a strength. These roofs in Colorado, you can put thousands of pounds of snow on top of them in a big snowstorm and they won't collapse. But it's because they lean on each other, and that tension creates strength. Which actually, I'm sorry, this is such a long answer, but it leads to the second thing that I was saying. What do we do with feeling uncomfortable? When you go through puberty, you feel uncomfortable. You're a girl, your body is turning into a woman's body. You go off to a class, it hasn't happened to anybody else in the class. You'll probably feel uncomfortable. You might even have people say something to you that's really mean. You might have interests where, I have a daughter who's a helicopter pilot. That's a 99% male dominated field. If she grew up today, for sure, she would be told, you must be a boy trapped in a girl's body.
Right.
She understands, however, that she's a woman, and she's a woman who is technically adept at flying helicopters. And she's passionate about it. Wasn't a question of gender for her. It was just, her interests. So, but what do you do when you're under stress? And we need to help our children learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
That you cannot be a successful person in life if you cannot learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And there are lots of examples. I've been diving quite a bit of places all over the world, and a pearl is formed because of an irritant of a grain of sand that gets inside of the shell. Trees that are out in the wind and get blown around grow deeper roots because they have to. It is the discomfort that somehow God works through this discomfort to shape us into being better people who are more thoughtful about others and the things they're going through, people who are more resilient, people who are willing to take risks that can turn out to be something that would help everybody, all of those kinds of things. And I just have this sense that a whole transgender conversation is just trying to prize comfort over everything else. And that is not the right way to raise children.
Not at all. And we see an epidemic of this in all areas. And I see this because this conversation is mostly going out to moms, and moms of ages of all ages of children, all ages of moms, but a lot of moms of young children that are needing to hear that they need to confidently declare to their children, not only that God made them the way that he did on purpose and that it is good. In fact, if anybody watching the video saw me on my phone typing this, I was like, what is the actual verse in Genesis? Because you were saying God made males and females to support each other harmoniously, to be a stronger humankind than they would be without each other. And all throughout creation, we see over and over again God declaring what he did good. and like meaning perfect, done, complete. And the only thing that he declares not good in all of his creation is in Genesis 2:18, where it says, "The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." That's the only time. And it's not because God messed up. There was a design there all along, but it was like, Adam, you need to see that he didn't find a helper suitable for him among the animals, among the trees, or
Yeah.
among, the water. He couldn't just commune with nature and be made complete. It is very clear, even specifically stated in scripture, that we need each other as men and women to be a complete representation of the Imago Dei. I wrote a book called "Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad" because I firmly
Yes.
believe exactly what you're saying, which is, as parents, and then as it trickles down to our children, we cannot grow, we cannot progress, we cannot be more sanctified unless we encounter struggle. And the Christian mindset is one of embracing struggle because it makes us more like Christ, and it also allows us to share in his sufferings, is what the Bible says. And then what you were talking about with, like, it's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. In fact, it helps you grow. It's kind of the crucible in which is formed your character. In Romans, it talks about how suffering produces character, and character produces, and then there's perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And if we
Yes.
want a generation of young people that is not drowning in self-doubt, anxiety, because it's interesting that way back at the beginning of this conversation, you were talking about people who were looking at young people and saying, "Oh, they're not doing well, so we're going to tell them the reason is because they're constricted by a definition of gender and sex that keeps them from thriving." When in fact, we look at the actual results of this ideology, and it is more confusion, more self-doubt, more self-loathing, and more anxiety, not less, right? We're seeing a huge uptick in prescriptions and diagnoses. Are you seeing this to be true?
Well, yes, again, it's just trying to find comfort. The whole idea behind transgender medicine is let's just try some different things and see if you become more comfortable in your body.
Mm.
That is the whole idea behind it. Well, certainly we don't want to glorify pain for the sake of pain.
Right.
But you also understand that being uncomfortable is part of growing. If you're training for a sport and today's training was not a little bit harder than yesterday's training, then you're not improving.
Right.
You're not moving toward winning. But I think the same thing is true in a lot of areas of life. I have a brother who's an orchestra conductor, and his mentor, Lauren Mazel, one of the greatest conductors who ever lived, told him, just be the very best conductor you can be today. And then tomorrow, improve in one thing, just one thing, not a million things, not 100 things, not even 10 things, just one thing. And then do that every single day for the rest of your life, and you will be a good conductor. What he's saying is, now you're going to be learning, you're going to be curious, and you're going to be growing literally every single day of your life. Now, I don't want to minimize the fact that there are people for whom gender dysphoria is real. I would say maybe out of one kid out of 1,000, maybe, it's a genuine clinical distress that they experience. In almost all of these situations, well, let me put it this way, because I don't want to speak for the whole world. Every young adult I've ever worked with who was significantly confused and transgender identifying not only had multiple comorbidities, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, they had also undergone some kind of a trauma as a child that was unresolved. And that trauma, it might not have even been identified by the adults in the child's life as a trauma. It could be going to a funeral and seeing grandma's body. I mean, or it could be, a boy and his classmates say, "You run like a girl."
Yeah.
It doesn't appear to be dramatic. Some of them that I've worked with were actual abusive situations. It's horrifying to think of. But for many, it was just something that planted a little bit of doubt. And so that's why it's so important for parents to find all kinds of different ways to ask, what happened that's causing you to think the way you're thinking?
Yeah, I think those are really good questions.
And if it's gender, you'll notice. Okay, it's the child who comes home from school, throws the backpack down, and immediately goes to the room. When every single other day for the child's entire life, they come in the kitchen and get a peanut butter sandwich. Okay, or they're mean to a sibling that they usually get along with. So there's something that happened, and trying to figure out what happened and help the child address it at that moment is part of the process of, that was really hard. And I'm a little sorry you had to go through that, but I know that when you go through hard things, you get a little bit stronger as a person. One story real quick. One young woman said to us, "Oh, when I was a teenager, I had frizzy hair and glasses and braces. And I kept looking at the cute cheerleader girl in my class, wishing I were more like her. And a wise older female mentor said to her, look, someday you're going to figure out what to do with your hair. You're going to get contacts. You're going to lose the braces. But what you've developed during this time of your life, your character, that is forever. That's forever. That's what we need to be focusing on right now, is your character."
Yes, and that was such wise words. I was just thinking when you were talking about your daughter who's the helicopter pilot. I'm not a helicopter pilot. I'm a homeschool mom of 10, but I grew up with a wide range of interests, sports being very high among them. And I remember at age 8, I wanted all of my hair cut off. Not buzzed, but quite short because it was getting in my way for sports. Now that backfired because I have very thick, big hair. And so my mom basically cut it in like a shroom haircut, and it just bloomed all over my head and flopped in my face, and I couldn't even pull it back in a ponytail. So bad idea. Do not recommend. I also remember that I wanted to have shorts sewn into all of my dresses at church so I could hang upside down on the monkey bars and not be impeded by my, feminine wear that was required of me. I think, were I to have had different parents and lived in our current culture, that people could very quickly have tried to convince me that I was male leaning, I also have like a lower voice. I have a confident personality. I have an analytical brain, all of these things that would not necessarily fit into a category of mostly feminine. But if you look at me, I'm wearing earrings and puff sleeves and flowers. Like, this is what I love. This is who I am. So what's interesting is you have a culture that's both saying, don't you dare define me. Don't you dare tell me who I am. I will figure that out. And then they're using very narrow, restrictive definitions to line themselves up against to say whether or not a 3 or 4-year-old is more male leaning or female leaning. The interesting thing is that while they are criticizing Christianity for being closed-minded, we are actually given a lot more freedom in Christ to manifest and express the unique ways in which he has made us male and female. But we are still affirming that he's the one that gave us those characteristics. I also had one more thought on this, which was that there is such a hyper focus on this that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I agree with you that there's probably not one person in the history of the transition through puberty that has not thought, this is weird at some point. But I do not remember being just completely freaked out by the process, mostly because my parents, specifically my mom, because I'm a girl, was very matter of fact about it. It was like, this is how God made you. This is a good thing. These changes are like, everybody's going to do this, and it will get you from this point to this point, and that's by design. Sometimes when we either are too secretive when our kids are small and we're terrified to talk to them about body changes, about God's good design for sex, about where babies come from, about what it looks like to be a child versus a woman or a child versus a man, then one, we abdicate that role of being the expert by talking to them first. And two, we create almost this like mystique or secrecy around something that if we were willing to just say, hey, I mean, I have 7 boys and 3 girls, 2 boys at the beginning, 5 little boys at the end. And several years ago, my now almost 11-year-old was asking me like, oh, how did Titus and Toby get in your tummy? And, or maybe it was get out. And I literally explained to him the physical aspects of a woman's body, the names for them, how the baby comes out of a woman's vagina, and how God gave her that instead of giving it to a man, because we are uniquely the ones created to bear life. And you know what he did? He looked at me and he was like, cool. That's cool. Like, he didn't freak out because
Yeah.
I didn't word it in such a way or look confused and embarrassed and turn red. I just said, isn't it cool that God gave women the ability to do that, not men? So I think your expertise in this area is so key, but I just wanted to put that plug in there for parents. Like, if you, on the one hand, don't build this up to such a huge thing that your kids dread puberty like nothing else in the world, but then also are willing to talk about it in a very frank way, I think that can diffuse a lot of the terror that's now surrounding it these days.
So good. I agree with you. I see what you're saying, and you're having raised 10 children and watched them in that process. When you say you got to talk about these things, and you can't be embarrassed about God's design. Don't be embarrassed about stuff that God's not embarrassed about. Then bring it up. But informally, we've polled students. Girls. How many of you girls would say at some point in your life you've been a tomboy? I'm guessing 70 to 80% of them say
sure.
And if you ask boys, how many of you ever felt like there was something that girls do a lot of, like, I don't know, learning to sew or playing the flute or whatever, that you kind of wish you could learn to do, but you didn't because you thought people would think you're strange? Then their hands go up.
Yeah.
There was one school, Dr. Leonard Sachs talks about this, where it was a boys' school and the boys signed up, did ballet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in a mixed gender school, they would never do that.
Right.
Because boys are not supposed to be in ballet. That's for girls.
Yeah.
But all the boys in the other school realized, when I do ballet, I'm better at football.
Yeah.
I want to be better at football. So I'm going to do ballet. It no longer had the stereotypical implications. Why do we have all these stereotypes ruling us today? It's because we have believed, and this is a lie from the pit of hell, but it is core to the transgender movement, that gender is on a spectrum. Over here, you have extreme masculinity. Over here, you have extreme femininity. G.I. Joe and Barbie. And since none of us are either G.I. Joe or Barbie, we're all kind of transgender. We're all right there in the middle. And that every person, every male has a little bit of female, and every female has a little bit of male. Even people who give a lot of otherwise good advice, like Jordan Peterson, teaches this, and it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It is a wrong way to understand reality. God made male and he made female. There is a male spectrum and there is a female spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's appropriate to understand that the most tomboyish girl has more in common with the most feminine girl than she does with the least masculine boy.
Absolutely. Do you feel like Charlie was right that we're using the wrong word to talk about all of this?
Yeah, well, this is really sad and hard. Charlie and I had a lot of these kinds of conversations because we, iron sharpens iron, and he said, "Man, I really want to talk about this on the show. When you guys get back from your vacation, we'll do a show." And while we were on vacation, he was killed.
Oh.
What I was going to explain to Charlie and in the audience is that this word gender has been used for 400 years in one particular way to refer to what the Bible sometimes calls what you think of as kinds.
Yes.
There's certain kinds. That's the word genus or genus has been used that way for 400 years. As soon as people began to classify different aspects of, especially the mammalian world, only in the last 30 or 40 years has the term gender been co-opted to mean something other than what it self-evidently means, which is the kinds of an organism. Mm. So that's what we were going to talk about on the show. And, I don't know if he would agreed with me or not, but I don't think gender is a fake word. I think it's a real word that some people are attempting to co-opt. And it's not too late to get it back and to restore it to its proper usage.
I love that. I love that you are affirming that words matter, that when they are misused, it causes disorder and chaos,
and that we as Christians, I think you're saying, have a responsibility to reclaim and reaffirm what God says those words mean, instead of letting culture do that for us. Jeff, I think this is a great resource for all parents, not only to interact with their children, but I think it will answer questions that parents have for themselves. I hear from a lot of moms who are like, I think I know what I believe, but I don't know how to articulate it. And
Yeah.
I want to just encourage you, my audience that's listening and watching, that this does exactly that. It has the scripts, it has the conversation starters, it has the definitions, it has the scientific and biblical backing. It is very thorough. Dr. Meyers and Dr. Cook have done a really, really good job of giving you a very practical resource so that if you feel lost, they've given you a roadmap to feel like you can confidently deal with this in a conversation with a peer or with one of your children, for sure. Any words of advice you want to leave us with today?
Yes, go to genderconfidentkids.com, genderconfidentkids.com. I want to give you a copy of the book.
Okay.
I had a donor, and I can't say this is going to happen for every book, but this donor said, I want to buy the first 40,000 copies.
Amazing.
Just distribute them. Now, a lot of people have said to me, Jeff, I don't want a free book. Okay, it's fine. There's a way you can make a donation on the page. And then that will help get the book to more people who need it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's my gift. And the other resources that are on that website are also our gift. The video course, the videos, the frequently asked questions. We took the 24 toughest questions that we have ever been asked about gender and put the answers to those questions on that website. But the only thing I would add is this. Don't wait until your child is questioning gender. The goal of this book was not primarily to help parents retrieve a situation that's terrifying.
Right.
But to be proactive, to prevent that conversation from ever being necessary, because your children are confident in the way God made them and confident that that design is good.
Yes, and it is good, and that is our role as parents, to help affirm what God has already said is true. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show today and for sharing with us. We absolutely appreciate you.
Thanks, Abby.
If you enjoyed the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.